I was standing in my garage in Omaha, Nebraska, staring at the empty space where my commercial-grade salt spreader should have been, when I realized that the HOA had finally crossed a line they could not come back from. The garage door was open, frost still clinging to the edges, and the concrete floor showed clear drag marks leading down my driveway. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in late January, and I had just gotten off a 12-hour shift at the hospital where I worked as a radiologic technologist. My name is Jacob Xerxes, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years. The neighborhood sat on the western edge of Omaha, where new developments sprawled across former farmland. The houses were nice enough, cookie-cutter colonials and split levels with vinyl siding and 2-car garages. The HOA, however, was a nightmare run by a woman named Karren Norwood, who seemed to believe her position as HOA president made her a feudal lord rather than a volunteer managing communal property. I pulled out my phone and checked my security camera footage. I had installed cameras 6 months earlier after Karren had threatened to fine me for leaving my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. The footage loaded, and there it was in grainy color. At approximately 2 in the morning, an HOA maintenance truck had pulled into my driveway. 2 men I recognized as workers the HOA occasionally hired stepped into my garage through the side door, which I now realized I had forgotten to lock after bringing in groceries the evening before. They spent about 5 minutes looking at my equipment before loading my salt spreader onto the truck bed and driving away. The salt spreader was not some cheap plastic thing you could pick up at a hardware store for $50. It was a professional-grade towable unit that I had purchased 2 years ago for $8,000. I used it for my side business, providing snow removal and salting services to several commercial properties around Omaha during the winter months. That spreader was essential to my business, and now it was gone. I immediately called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The dispatcher was helpful and said an officer would be out within the hour to take my statement and review the footage. Then I sent an email to Karren Norwood at the HOA email address, keeping my tone professional but direct. I explained that my property had been taken without permission, that I had video evidence, and that I expected the immediate return of my equipment along with compensation for any business I lost during its absence. The response came back within 20 minutes, which surprised me. Karren wrote that the HOA had exercised its right under the covenants, conditions, and restrictions to temporarily utilize homeowner equipment for emergency community maintenance. Apparently, there had been an ice storm warning, and the HOA's regular contractor had equipment failures. She claimed they had tried to reach me but could not, so they made an executive decision to borrow my spreader to ensure the safety of the community. I read the email 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. There was no provision in our CC and Articus that allowed the HOA to enter private property and take personal belongings. I had read those documents cover to cover when I bought the house specifically, because I had heard horror stories about HOAs. This was theft, plain and simple, dressed up in bureaucratic language. Officer Ramirez arrived at 8:15, a middle-aged cop with tired eyes who had probably seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable. I showed him the footage, gave him the email from Karren, and explained the situation. He watched the video twice, made notes, and asked me about the value of the spreader. $8,000 initial purchase, I said. Current market value is probably around $6,000 given depreciation and wear, but I also lost income. I had 3 commercial clients scheduled for today, worth about $1,500 total. Officer Ramirez nodded slowly. This is a tricky one, he said. Technically, it is theft. They entered your property without permission and took something of significant value. However, they are claiming it was for community safety and they are your HOA. These situations can get complicated legally. But they did not have permission, I insisted. And there is nothing in our governing documents that allows this. I checked. I believe you, the officer said. Here is what I recommend. File a formal report, which I will do now. Document everything. Send them a certified letter demanding the return of your property and compensation for your losses. Give them a reasonable deadline. If they do not comply, you can pursue this criminally and civilly. After Officer Ramirez left, I sat down at my kitchen table and started making calls to my clients, explaining the situation and rescheduling. 2 of them were understanding. The third, a strip mall owner named Marcus, who had used my services for years, was frustrated because his property needed to be safe for customers that day. He said he would have to call someone else and could not guarantee he would reschedule with me. That hurt. My side business was more than just extra income. It was something I had built from nothing, buying equipment with saved money and earning clients through reliable service. Now, Karren Norwood's entitled theft was threatening that. I spent the next 2 hours drafting a formal demand letter. I listed the spreader's replacement value at $6,000, added the $1,500 in lost business, and included a new item, an unauthorized use fee. I had done some research on equipment rental rates, and a spreader like mine would typically rent for $300 per day from a commercial supplier. I calculated that if they kept it for the average duration of winter weather events, about a week, that would be $2,100 in rental fees they had avoided paying by stealing mine. The total came to $9,600. I gave them 72 hours to return the spreader and provide compensation, or I would pursue all legal remedies available, including criminal charges for theft and civil litigation for damages. I sent the letter via certified mail and email, making sure to copy not just Karren but the entire HOA board and the property management company they contracted with. Then I posted about the situation in a private Facebook group for Meadowbrook Estates residents, including screenshots of the security footage and the correspondence with Karren. The response was immediate and divided. Several neighbors expressed outrage on my behalf, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. Others defended Karren, saying that community safety came first and that I should be more understanding. A few people suggested I was overreacting and should just be glad my equipment was being used for the greater good. That last group particularly annoyed me. If the greater good required my equipment, they could have asked. They could have offered to rent it properly. Instead, they had committed theft and then tried to gaslight me into thinking it was acceptable. By noon, my phone started ringing. The first call was from Patricia Gilmore, a member of the HOA board who had always seemed more reasonable than Karren. Patricia sounded stressed. "Jacob, I just saw your letter and the Facebook post," she said. "I need you to know that I was not consulted about taking your equipment. I did not even know it happened until this morning." "Then who authorized it?" I asked. Karren made the decision herself, along with Donald Reeves. Donald was another board member, a retired insurance adjuster who seemed to spend his days finding violations of HOA rules to report. The rest of us were not informed. They said it was an emergency that required immediate action. It was theft, Patricia. They broke into my garage and stole an $8,000 piece of equipment. I understand why you are upset, she said carefully. I am trying to arrange an emergency board meeting to discuss this. Would you be willing to attend and let us try to resolve this amicably? I am willing to have my property returned immediately and be compensated for my losses, I said. That is how this gets resolved amicably. Otherwise, I am pursuing this through the courts and the police. Patricia sighed. I will do what I can. The board meeting is set for tonight at 7 at the community center. Please come. And please, Jacob, consider taking down the Facebook post. It is making this situation more difficult. No, I said flatly. The community has a right to know what their HOA is doing. If Karren is embarrassed, that is on her, not me. I spent the afternoon reaching out to an attorney. I found a lawyer named Richard Chen who specialized in both civil litigation and property law. His office was in downtown Omaha, and he agreed to see me at 4 that afternoon for a consultation. Richard was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out everything: the theft, the footage, Karren's justification, the demand letter, and the upcoming board meeting. This is actually pretty straightforward from a legal perspective, Richard said after reviewing everything. They committed theft. No provision in your CC and Articus allows them to enter your property and take your belongings. The fact that they claim it was an emergency is irrelevant. They had other options. They could have called you, knocked on your door, hired a different contractor, or waited until morning to get proper authorization. What about the unauthorized use fees I included? I asked. That is where it gets interesting, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. You can argue for the fair market rental value of the equipment. Courts often award that when someone uses property without permission. Your calculation seems reasonable based on commercial rates. You can also claim your actual lost income, which you can document. The biggest question is whether you want to push this criminally or handle it civilly. What is the difference in outcome? Criminally, if the prosecutor pursues it, Karren and anyone else involved could face theft charges. Given the value, this would likely be a Class Roman IV felony in Nebraska, punishable by up to 2 years imprisonment and a fine. Realistically, they would probably get probation and restitution. Civilly, you sue for damages. You would likely win based on what you have shown me, and they would owe you the money plus court costs. But no criminal record. I thought about it. I want my money, but I also want this on record. If Karren gets away with this, she will keep abusing her position. Richard nodded. Then my advice is to attend the board meeting tonight with me. Let them know you have counsel. See if they offer full restitution. If they do not, we file the police report formally as a theft charge and simultaneously file a civil suit. The criminal case will strengthen the civil case, and the civil case ensures you get compensated even if the criminal case gets pled down. How much will this cost me? I asked. For the civil case, I can work on contingency since it is so clear-cut. I take 30% of whatever we recover. For the criminal side, I just advise you and make sure your interests are protected, which I can bill hourly. But honestly, once we show the prosecutor your evidence, they will do most of the work if they decide to pursue charges. We shook hands, and I left his office feeling more confident. I was not just some angry homeowner yelling into the void. I had documentation, legal backing, and a clear path forward. The community center was packed when I arrived at 6:50 that evening. Word had spread through the neighborhood, and apparently everyone wanted to see this drama unfold. Richard accompanied me, carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit that immediately signaled to everyone that this was serious. Karren Norwood was already seated at the head table with the other 4 board members: Patricia Gilmore, Donald Reeves, Sandra Mitchell, and Tyrone, Washington. Karren was exactly what you would expect from her behavior. She was in her early 50s, with blonde hair cut in a severe bob, thin lips pressed into a disapproving line, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. The meeting was called to order, and Karren immediately tried to control the narrative. "Before we begin open discussion, I want to address the elephant in the room," she said, her voice sharp. "The HOA made a difficult decision during an emergency situation to ensure the safety of our community. We utilized available resources to treat our streets for ICE. One of those resources happened to belong to Mr. Xerxes. We intended to notify him and offer compensation, but he has instead chosen to make this into a legal matter and slander the HOA on social media." I stood up, my jaw tight. "I did not slander anyone. I posted facts and evidence, and you did not borrow my equipment. You stole it. You broke into my garage at 2 in the morning and took an $8,000 spreader without permission, without notification, and without any legal right to do so." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard put a calming hand on my arm and stood as well. "Good evening. I am Richard Chen, Mr. Xerxes' attorney. I think it is important that we establish the facts clearly. The HOA's actions meet the legal definition of theft under Nebraska law. Mr. Xerxes has video evidence. A police report has been filed, and he has made a reasonable demand for the return of his property and compensation for his losses." Donald Reeves, a heavy-set man with a red face, leaned forward. "Now hold on. This was a community emergency. We had reports of freezing rain and our regular contractor's equipment broke down. We could not reach Jacob, so we made a judgment call to protect our residents." "Did you knock on my door?" I asked. "It was 2 in the morning, Karren said dismissively. "Exactly. So you did not try to reach me. You just decided to break into my garage and take my property. What if I had an alarm? What if I had mistaken your workers for burglars and called the police? Or worse?" "That is an absurd hypothetical," Karren said. "No, it is not," Richard interjected. "Castle doctrine is a very real thing in Nebraska. Mr. Xerxes would have been within his rights to defend his property. But more importantly, there is no emergency exception in your governing documents that allows you to seize homeowner property. You had other options. You could have waited until morning. You could have hired a different contractor. You could have called around to rental companies. Instead, you chose to commit theft." Sandra Mitchell, a quiet woman who usually stayed out of controversies, spoke up. "Can I ask where the spreader is now?" Karren hesitated. "It is still being used by our maintenance crew." "So 3 days later you still have my property," I said, my voice rising. "And you have not offered to return it or compensate me. In fact, your first response was to justify the theft." Patricia Gilmore looked at Karren with clear frustration. "Karren, I think we need to return Mr. Xerxes' equipment immediately and discuss compensation. This has gone too far." "I disagree," Karren said coldly. "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain safe conditions for all residents. That supersedes one individual's claim to property that was temporarily utilized for the common good." I could not believe what I was hearing. She was doubling down. Richard stepped in again, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Norwood, let me be very clear about the situation you are in. My client has grounds for criminal charges that could result in felony theft convictions for anyone involved in this decision. He also has grounds for a civil suit that the HOA will lose, costing the HOA, and by extension every homeowner in this community, significant money in damages and legal fees. The smart move here is to return the spreader immediately, compensate Mr. Xerxes for his documented losses, and hope he decides not to pursue criminal charges." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Tyrone Washington, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. He was a middle-aged black man who worked as an engineer and had always struck me as pragmatic. "I think we need to vote on this. I move that we return Mr. Xerxes's spreader immediately, compensate him for the replacement value of any damage to it, pay him for his lost business income, and agree to a reasonable rental fee for the time we used it." "I second that motion," Patricia said quickly. Karren's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. We are giving in to extortion." "It is not extortion," Richard said. "It is restitution for theft. There is a difference." The vote was called. Patricia, Tyrone, and Sandra voted in favor of returning my property and providing compensation. Donald voted against it. Karren, as president, also voted against it. The motion passed 3-2. "Fine," Karren said bitterly. "We will return your precious spreader, but I will not agree to anything beyond that without seeing documented proof of damages." "That is acceptable," Richard said. "We will provide full documentation of the purchase price, current value, lost business income, and rental fees for your review. We expect payment in full within 30 days of receiving the spreader back." Karren glared at me like I had personally wronged her. "This is not over, Mr. Xerxes. If you think you can sue the HOA without consequences, you are mistaken." "Is that a threat?" Richard asked sharply. "It is a fact," Karren said. "The HOA has rules and standards that all residents must follow. We will be watching to ensure Mr. Xerxes is in full compliance." The implication was clear. She was going to retaliate by nitpicking every possible HOA violation she could find. I felt my temper flare, but Richard squeezed my shoulder, a silent signal to stay calm. "Any retaliatory actions by the HOA will be documented and can be used as evidence of bad faith in any legal proceedings," Richard said. "I would advise against that course of action." The meeting broke up shortly after. Several neighbors approached me, some offering support, others giving me dirty looks. One woman, an elderly resident named Margaret, patted my hand and said, "Good for you, dear. Karren has needed someone to stand up to her for years." My spreader was returned the next morning. A sullen maintenance worker dropped it off in my driveway at 8 a.m. I immediately inspected it and found problems. The salt distribution mechanism was jammed. One of the tires had a slow leak it did not have before, and there were scrapes along the metal hopper that had not been there previously. I took extensive photos and videos documenting everything. I called Richard and explained the damage. He advised me to get a professional assessment of the cost to repair or replace the damaged components. I contacted the company I had originally purchased the spreader from, a commercial equipment dealer in Lincoln, Nebraska. They sent out a technician 2 days later who examined the spreader and provided a written estimate. The distribution mechanism needed to be replaced entirely, which would cost $1,200 in parts and labor. The tire could be repaired for $80. The scrapes were cosmetic, but reduced the resale value by an estimated $500. Total damages: $1,780, on top of the $6,000 current value of the spreader if it had been in proper condition. I sent this assessment to the HOA board via email, along with invoices from the commercial clients I had lost business with, totaling $1,500. I also included a calculation of the rental fees, commercial rental rate of $300 per day times 4 days of use, equaling $1,200. The total bill came to $10,480. I gave them 30 days to pay, as Richard had suggested at the meeting. Karren's response was predictably hostile. She sent an email claiming the damage was pre-existing and that I was inflating the value to defraud the HOA. She demanded I provide proof that the spreader was in perfect condition before they took it, which of course I could not do beyond my word and the assessment from the professional technician. This was the problem with dealing with people like Karren. They were so convinced of their own righteousness that they could not see reason. Richard advised me that we had enough to move forward with both criminal and civil proceedings. The criminal complaint was filed first. I went to the police station with all my documentation and met with a detective named Lisa Morrison who specialized in property crimes. She reviewed the evidence, the security footage, the emails, the board meeting minutes that Patricia had sent me, and the damage assessment. "This is one of the clearer cases I have seen," Detective Morrison said. "Usually, HOA disputes are civil matters, but this crosses the line into criminal theft. The value alone makes it a felony. And the fact that they have not made full restitution, despite acknowledging they took the property, shows bad faith." She forwarded the case to the Douglas County Attorney's Office with a recommendation to prosecute. A week later, I received a call from an assistant county attorney named James Patterson. He wanted to meet with me to discuss the case. James Patterson was in his 40s, a career prosecutor with a reputation for being tough but fair. We met at his office in downtown Omaha, and he went through the evidence again with me. "Here is the situation," he said. "I think we can definitely charge Karren Norwood and Donald Reeves with felony theft. The question is whether we also charge the workers who actually took the spreader. From the footage, they appear to be following orders from the HOA. It is possible they believed they had authorization. I do not want to punish working guys who were just doing what they were told," I said. "Karren and Donald are the ones who made the decision. They are the ones who refused to make it right." "That is what I thought you would say," James said. "I appreciate that. We will focus on the leadership. I am going to offer them a deal first. Full restitution to you, plus a fine, plus probation, in exchange for pleading to a misdemeanor. If they refuse, we go to trial on felony charges." "What are the chances they take the deal?" I asked. "Depends on how stubborn they are," James said with a slight smile. "People in positions like Karren's often have a hard time admitting they were wrong. But once they see a felony charge on paper, reality usually sets in." The charges were filed 2 weeks later. Karren Norwood and Donald Reeves were both charged with theft by unlawful taking, a Class Roman IV felony in Nebraska. The news spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. The Facebook group I had posted in originally exploded with activity. Some people were shocked that it had gone this far. Others cheered that the HOA was finally being held accountable. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and the remaining board members voted to place Karren on administrative leave as president. Patricia Gilmore became acting president. She called me personally to apologize. "Jacob, I am so sorry this happened," she said, sounding genuinely distressed. "I have been on this board for 5 years, and I have always tried to do right by the community. What Karren did was inexcusable. The HOA will pay you what you are owed. We have insurance that should cover it." "I appreciate that, Patricia," I said. "I never wanted this to become a big thing. I just wanted my property back and to be compensated fairly." "I know. And for what it is worth, a lot of us are reevaluating how this HOA operates. Karren ran things like a dictatorship, and we let her because she was willing to do all the work. That was a mistake." The HOA's insurance company contacted me a week later. After reviewing the evidence and consulting with their legal team, they agreed to pay the full amount I had requested, $10,480. The check arrived via certified mail, along with a formal apology letter from Patricia on behalf of the board. I deposited the check and felt a sense of relief. The money was not really the point, though it was necessary to cover my actual losses. The point was that actions had consequences, even for HOA board members who thought they were above the rules. But the legal case was not over. Karren and Donald both refused the plea deal. Their attorney, a slick-looking defense lawyer named Marcus Blanchard, argued that they had acted in good faith during an emergency and that the charges should be dismissed. The county attorney's office pushed back, and the case was set for trial. I was surprised they were willing to take it that far. Richard explained that Karren probably could not psychologically accept that she had done anything wrong. People like her build their identity around being the authority, he said. Admitting she committed a crime would shatter that self-image. She would rather go to trial and risk a felony conviction than admit fault. The trial was scheduled for late April, 3 months after the original theft. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Estates continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The HOA became much less aggressive under Patricia's leadership. Several new policies were implemented, including a requirement that any non-routine actions had to be approved by a majority of the board, not just the president. Homeowners who had been living in fear of random violations started to relax. I continued my snow removal business through the rest of the winter. My spreader, repaired and functional, earned me good money during several late-season storms. My commercial clients remained loyal, and I even picked up 2 new ones after word spread about how I had stood up to my HOA. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. It lasted 2 days. The prosecution presented the security footage, my testimony, Officer Ramirez's report, Detective Morrison's investigation findings, and the email correspondence. Richard testified as an expert witness on property law and the HOA's governing documents. The defense tried to argue emergency necessity, but the judge was not buying it. The defendants had multiple legal options available to them, Judge Helen Kowalski said during her ruling. They chose instead to unlawfully enter Mr. Xerxes's property and take his equipment without permission. The fact that they intended to use it for community benefit is irrelevant. Theft is theft, regardless of the perpetrator's intentions. Karren Norwood and Donald Reeves were both convicted of felony theft. Judge Kowalski sentenced them each to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered them to jointly pay a $5,000 fine on top of the restitution the HOA insurance had already covered. They were also barred from serving on any HOA board in Nebraska for 5 years. Karren's face during the sentencing was a mixture of shock and fury. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then, I remembered the arrogance in her voice when she had justified stealing my property, and the sympathy evaporated. Outside the courthouse, reporters from local news stations asked me for comments. The story had gained traction as a David versus Goliath tale of a homeowner standing up to an abusive HOA. I kept my statement simple. I just want people to understand that HOAs are bound by the same laws as everyone else, I said. You cannot take someone's property without permission, no matter what position you hold. I hope this case sets a precedent that HOA boards need to operate with transparency and respect for homeowners' rights. The story ran on 3 local news channels that evening and was picked up by several national outlets covering HOA horror stories. I got interview requests from podcasts and YouTube channels dedicated to discussing HOA abuses. I did a few of them, always making the same points. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. In the months that followed, I noticed a shift in how HOAs operated in the Omaha area. Several other homeowners reached out to me, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach and asking for advice. Some filed their own lawsuits. Others simply used the threat of legal action to get their HOAs to back down from questionable enforcement actions. Patricia Gilmore turned out to be a much better HOA president than Karren had ever been. She ran the organization with common sense and communication. When issues arose, she reached out to homeowners directly to discuss solutions rather than immediately issuing fines or violations. The neighborhood became more pleasant to live in. Karren Norwood moved out of Meadowbrook Estates 6 months after the trial. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had divorced, and she had moved to Colorado. I did not take any pleasure in that. I had never wanted to ruin her life. I just wanted her to follow the rules she was so eager to enforce on everyone else. Donald Reeves also resigned from the board and kept a much lower profile. He completed his community service hours at a local food bank and stayed out of HOA politics. My side business continued to grow. The publicity from the case actually helped, as several property managers saw me as someone reliable who stood by his principles. I expanded my services to include summer lawn care and parking lot maintenance. The money from the settlement helped me purchase additional equipment, including a backup salt spreader, so I would never again be left without tools if something happened to my primary unit. The HOA case became something of a local legend in Omaha. When I met new people and mentioned where I lived, someone would often say, "Wait, is not that the neighborhood where the guy sued the HOA for stealing his snow equipment?" It was a strange kind of fame, but it felt good to be known for standing up for what was right. One afternoon in August, almost a year after the original theft, I was in my garage organizing equipment when Patricia stopped by. She looked hesitant, like she was not sure she should be there. "Hey, Patricia," I said, "what can I do for you?" "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "I know that sounds weird, but you really did this neighborhood a favor. Karren had been getting worse and worse, and none of us had the courage to stand up to her. You forced a change that needed to happen." "I did not do it for the neighborhood," I admitted. "I did it because I was angry and I knew I was right." "Sometimes that is what it takes," Patricia said with a smile. "Anyway, I wanted you to know that the board voted to give you the HOA Member of the Year award at our annual meeting next month." I laughed. "You are kidding." "I am not." We added a new award category for someone who demonstrates exceptional service to the community through their actions. You qualify. Plus, it will be a nice bit of closure for everyone. I accepted the award at the September meeting, which was held at the same community center where the confrontation had happened 10 months earlier. The room was full of neighbors, most of whom clapped politely. A few gave me standing ovations. It was surreal. In my brief acceptance speech, I kept things light. "I never thought I would get an award from the HOA, especially after suing them," I said, which got a good laugh. "But seriously, I think this past year has shown that communities work best when there is mutual respect and open communication. I am glad we can move forward together." After the meeting, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and share their own positive experiences with the new board. One man told me he had been able to paint his house a slightly different shade than originally approved without getting fined because Patricia had worked with him to find a compromise. A woman mentioned that the board had actually helped her resolve a dispute with a neighbor over a fence line, rather than just issuing violations to both parties. These were small things, but they mattered. They showed that an HOA could be a force for good in a community rather than an authoritarian nightmare. As fall turned to winter again, I prepared for another season of snow removal. My business was booming, and I had hired 2 part-time employees to help with the workload. My equipment was well maintained and secured in my garage with upgraded locks and additional security cameras. One snowy morning in December, I was loading up my truck when I saw Patricia out clearing her driveway. I drove over and offered to do it for her free of charge as a thank you for everything she had done to reform the HOA. "You do not have to do that," she said, but I could tell she was touched. "I want to," I said. "Besides, it will take me 5 minutes." As I cleared her driveway, I thought about how much had changed in less than 2 years. I had gone from a regular homeowner minding his own business to someone who had taken on an abusive HOA and won. It had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had been worth it. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. The police had taken my complaint seriously. The prosecutor had pursued charges. The judge had applied the law fairly. And in the end, justice had been served. But more than that, the community had learned an important lesson. HOAs were not untouchable. Board members were not above the law. And homeowners had rights that deserved to be respected. I finished Patricia's driveway and waved as I drove off to my first commercial client of the day. The roads were slick, and my spreader was loaded with salt, ready to make parking lots and driveways safe for the people who depended on me. It felt good to be doing the work I loved with equipment I had rightfully reclaimed, and to be living in a neighborhood that had transformed from a place of constant tension into an actual community. The story could have ended badly. Karren could have gotten away with the theft. The HOA could have retaliated and made my life miserable. The legal system could have dismissed my case as a petty neighborhood squabble. But none of those things happened because I had been willing to stand up for myself, document everything, and follow through. That winter was one of the busiest I had ever had. The snow seemed to fall every few days, and my phone rang constantly with requests for service. My employees worked hard, and we built a reputation as the most reliable snow removal service in western Omaha. The money was good, but more importantly, the work was satisfying. In late January, almost exactly a year after the theft, I was featured in a local business magazine in an article about successful side businesses. The interviewer asked me about the HOA incident, and I shared the story again, emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights and standing up for yourself. A lot of people think that going up against an organization like an HOA is impossible, I said in the interview. But the truth is, if you have evidence and the law on your side, you can win. It takes courage and persistence, but it can be done. The article generated more business for me and more emails from homeowners dealing with their own HOA problems. I became an unofficial resource for people in similar situations, offering advice based on my experience. I was not a lawyer, but I could tell people what had worked for me and connect them with resources. Richard Chen and I stayed in touch. He occasionally referred clients to me who needed snow removal services, and I referred people who needed legal help with property issues to him. It was a good professional relationship that had come out of a difficult situation. One evening in February, I was at home watching television when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Donald Reeves standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "Donald," I said, surprised. "What can I do for you? Can I come in for a minute?" he asked. "I want to talk to you." I hesitated but stepped aside to let him in. We sat in my living room and there was an awkward silence before he spoke. "I want to apologize," Donald said, not meeting my eyes. "What we did to you was wrong. I knew it at the time, but Karren was so insistent and I went along with it. I have spent the past year thinking about how I let my judgment get clouded because I thought we were doing something for the community, but we were just stealing from you, plain and simple." I did not know what to say. I had not expected this. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I need to make amends," he said. "I completed my community service, and I am in therapy trying to understand why I went along with something I knew was wrong. My therapist suggested I apologize directly to the people I hurt. You are at the top of that list." I appreciated the honesty. "I accept your apology," I said. "I do not have any hard feelings toward you, Donald. You made a bad choice and you paid the consequences. That is how it is supposed to work." Donald nodded, looking relieved. "Thank you. That means a lot. And for what it is worth, I think what you did took a lot of guts. A lot of people would have just complained to their neighbors and let it go. You followed through, and it made a difference." After Donald left, I thought about forgiveness and accountability. He had done something wrong, faced the consequences, and was trying to make things right. That was all anyone could really ask for. Karren, as far as I knew, had never shown any remorse or accepted responsibility. That was her choice, but it meant she would probably never find peace with what had happened. Spring came, and with it, the end of snow season. I switched my business focus to lawn care and maintenance. My side business had grown to the point where I was considering making it my full-time job. The hospital would always be there, but the entrepreneurial side of me was drawn to the freedom and potential of working for myself. In April, I attended a city council meeting where new HOA regulations were being discussed. The Omaha City Council had received numerous complaints about HOA overreach in recent years, and my case had been cited as an example of what could go wrong. The proposed regulations would require HOAs to have more transparent governance, give homeowners easier paths to appeal violations, and prohibit certain retaliatory actions. I testified in favor of the regulations, sharing my story and emphasizing the need for oversight. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, I said. But they need to operate within the law and with respect for homeowners' rights. These regulations would help ensure that happens. The regulations passed on a 6-1 vote. It felt like another small victory in a larger battle to reform how HOAs operated. By summer, life had settled into a comfortable routine. My business was thriving, my relationship with my neighbors was good, and the HOA was functioning properly under Patricia's leadership. I had even started dating someone, a nurse from the hospital named Jennifer, who thought my HOA battle was hilarious and admirable in equal measure. One Saturday in July, the neighborhood held its annual summer block party. It was the first one I had attended since moving to Meadowbrook Estates, having previously avoided HOA events because of Karren's presence. With her gone, the atmosphere was much more relaxed. I brought my grill and spent the afternoon cooking burgers and hot dogs for neighbors. Kids ran through sprinklers, adults chatted and laughed, and there was a genuine sense of community that I had not felt before. Patricia gave a brief speech thanking everyone for their patience during the HOA's transition and promising continued transparency and fairness. At one point, an older man named Harold, who lived 3 doors down from me, pulled me aside. "I want you to know that I voted against you at that first board meeting," he said. "I thought you were being selfish and not thinking about the community, but I was wrong. You did us all a favor by standing up to Karren. She was making this place miserable, and I did not even realize it until she was gone, so thank you." I shook his hand. "Thanks for telling me that, Harold. I appreciate it." As the sun set and the party wound down, I helped clean up with several other neighbors. Jennifer had joined me, and she fit right in with the group, laughing and joking as we bagged trash and folded tables. It felt good to be part of a community that functioned properly, where people looked out for each other without being tyrannical about rules. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on everything that had happened since that cold January morning when I discovered my salt spreader missing. It had been a long, frustrating journey, but it had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the fact that the legal system, for all its flaws, could deliver justice when used properly. I had recovered my property, been compensated for my losses, seen the people responsible held accountable, and helped reform both my HOA and the broader regulations governing HOAs in Omaha. It was more than I could have hoped for when I first filed that police report. The experience had changed me in subtle ways. I was more confident in my ability to navigate difficult situations. I was more aware of my rights and responsibilities as a homeowner and citizen. And I was more willing to stand up for what I believed was right, even when it was uncomfortable or risky. In August, I made the decision to leave my hospital job and run my property maintenance business full-time. It was a scary leap, but the business had grown enough that I felt confident I could make it work. My last day at the hospital was bittersweet. I had worked there for 8 years, and I would miss my colleagues, but I was excited about the future. The business continued to grow through the fall. I hired 2 more employees and purchased a second truck. We expanded our service area beyond Omaha into some of the smaller surrounding communities. By the time winter rolled around again, I was running a legitimate company with 6 employees and 30 regular commercial clients. That second winter after the theft was busy, but much less stressful than the first. I had backup equipment, reliable employees, and systems in place to handle the workload. When the snow fell, we were ready. One afternoon in December, I got a call from a property management company in Lincoln, asking if I would be interested in bidding on a contract to service several of their properties. It was a big opportunity, and I spent several days preparing a proposal. We got the contract, which represented a significant expansion of the business. As I signed the paperwork for the Lincoln contract, I thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If Karren had not stolen my salt spreader, I probably would have continued running my side business at a small scale, content with just a few clients. But her theft and my response to it had generated publicity that brought in new clients and forced me to expand. In a weird way, her criminal action had inadvertently helped my business grow. I did not thank her for it, obviously, but I could appreciate the irony. In early January, almost 2 years after the original incident, I received an email from a documentary producer in California. She was working on a project about HOA abuses across America and wanted to interview me for it. I agreed, and she flew to Omaha a few weeks later with a small film crew. The interview lasted about 3 hours. We went through the entire story again, from discovering my spreader missing to the trial and its aftermath. The producer was particularly interested in how the community had changed under new leadership and how my case had influenced local regulations. "Your story is important because it shows that homeowners can fight back and win," she said. "So many people feel powerless against their HOAs, but you had evidence, you knew your rights, and you followed through. That is the model for how to handle these situations." The documentary was released 6 months later on a streaming platform. My segment was about 15 minutes of the total 90-minute film, which featured several other HOA horror stories from around the country. Some were worse than mine, people losing their homes over minor violations, HOAs foreclosing on properties over trivial debts, board members embezzling funds. My case was presented as one of the success stories where the homeowner prevailed. The documentary generated another round of media attention. I did several more interviews and podcast appearances. My business got even more clients from the exposure. It was surreal to think that a simple theft had led to all of this, but through it all, I stayed grounded. I remembered that the point had never been fame or business growth. It had been about principle. Someone had wronged me, and I had stood up for myself using the tools available in a democratic society: documentation, legal counsel, and the court system. That was the real story. By the spring of the third year, I had achieved a level of success with my business that I had never imagined possible. We had 15 employees, 50 regular commercial clients, and contracts in 3 counties. I had moved the operation out of my garage and into a proper commercial space with an office and equipment storage. Jennifer and I got engaged that April. We planned a wedding for the following fall and started looking at houses together. Ironically, she wanted to stay in Meadowbrook Estates because she loved the community atmosphere that had developed under the reformed HOA. So we started looking at larger homes within the neighborhood. We found a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial at the end of a cul-de-sac and made an offer. As part of the closing process, I had to review the HOA documents again, which gave me a strange sense of déjà vu. But this time, reading through the CC and Articles and bylaws, I felt confident that the HOA would respect my rights as a homeowner. The wedding was perfect. We got married in early October, with the reception at a historic mansion in downtown Omaha. Several of my neighbors attended, including Patricia, who had become a good friend. Even Harold came, bringing a generous gift and a card that read, "To the man who saved our neighborhood." As Jennifer and I settled into our new home, I sometimes thought about Karren and Donald and what might have been if I had just let the theft go. My spreader would have been returned eventually, probably damaged. I would have been angry but powerless. Karren would have continued to run the HOA like a dictator, making life miserable for everyone. And nothing would have changed. Instead, by standing up for myself, I had set in motion a series of events that transformed my life and my community. I had built a successful business, helped reform HOA practices in my city, found love, and become part of a genuine community. All because I had refused to accept that someone could steal from me just because they held a position of authority. The lesson, if there was one, was simple. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The system is not perfect, but it works when people are willing to use it. As I write this, 5 years after the original incident, I am sitting in my home office looking out at my neighborhood. It is a cold January morning, snow is falling, and my crews are out servicing our clients. My business is well established and profitable. My marriage is strong. And I live in a community where the HOA actually serves the residents rather than terrorizing them. Karren Norwood is somewhere in Colorado, living with the consequences of her choices. Donald Reeves still lives in the neighborhood, keeping a low profile and working in his garden. Patricia Gilmore is wrapping up her final term as HOA president before passing the role to someone else, having restored faith in the organization. And me. I am just a guy who refused to let his HOA steal from him and got away with it. It should not have been a big deal. In a just world, it would not have been, but I am glad I fought back. I am glad I documented everything. I am glad I hired a good lawyer and followed through with the legal process, because in the end, justice prevailed. The bad actors were held accountable. The system was reformed. And life got better for everyone involved, except those who had abused their power in the first place. That is how it should work, and if it ever happens again, I will be ready.